welcome everybody. Um, Everybody knows a bunch of people that have been on here. If you can hear me, just let me know either where you're from or your favorite summer activity. I kind of tricked you, the people that come on and tell me where they're from or immediately. Monica's from Randolph, huh? I didn't know that. So somebody just said we are here. Okay, so we'll just give everybody a couple minutes to log on, make sure they're going, make sure we're moving along. Gibbons PC. Okay. Nobody's giving me their summer activity.
Oh, we got one.
Beach.
Which beach, finally.
That's a good answer.
Okay, we got one summer activity. It's interesting. Okay, everybody, welcome to our May, another beach, Allison. Welcome to our May CFO Roundtable. Our topic today is top tips on how to avoid forensic risk. So we want to bring something different. We're tired of PPP. I mean, we love Chris Martin, but we're just getting tired of the PPP stuff. We want to bring something different to business leaders that will help them with their company. Not that PPP doesn't, absolutely does, but just a different element. Please, everybody, especially people that have been on here, please remember, if you have any questions, put it in the Q&A. That's where we will be reviewing for any questions. If you want to have a discussion, feel free to chat away in the chat, but please don't put questions in the chat session because it gets all cluttered with people telling me their summer activity and stuff like that. In order to get CPE, we will be presenting polls. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to show the first poll. So who do you consult when preparing for business-related legal documents? A lawyer, a family member, your neighbor, or nobody? Becky, whoever designed the poll, those are great choices. And I love when clients will call me and ask me how to legally set up a company. I'm like, I'm not a lawyer. Okay, please, you should really talk with a lawyer. So let's see what they say. So you do have to answer at least 2/3 of the polls, and there's 4, so figure out what 2/3 is from there. And to be able to get CPE. We'll let everybody finish answering that, and it looks like 75% say a lawyer. One person said a family member, non-lawyer. I must be like the smartest family member ever. Their neighbor just usually has good beers, and then somebody says nobody. So they're the smartest people themselves. So, okay, let's close that poll. Thank you very much for going through that, and now we will start with the presentation. So, as I said, the topic today is top tips on how to avoid forensic risk. Presenting today is Rebecca Fitzhugh, a partner in the forensics department. I'm sure she'll correct me as to what the exact department title is. And Megan Kelly, who's a manager, who I'm just going to say is in the forensics department too. So just leave it at that. And I'm going to jump into, or I'll start off by saying one thing. As auditors, people think that we're there to find fraud. I'm going to say right off the top of the bat, we as auditors do not audit to find fraud. And if you think that your audit is going to find fraud, you're mistaken, because that's not how our audits are designed. Now, I believe, and I have a sneaky suspicion Becky will not correct me, but guide me into the right thought process, is forensic accountants and forensic accounting is generally built to look for fraudulent activity. Is that accurate, Becky?
To a certain extent.
Got it part right. It's like Dumb and Dumber, so there's still a chance.
There's still a chance, Brad, because it's a really wide field in forensic accounting. And you're absolutely right that a financial statement audit is not designed to find fraud. Financial statement audits are just designed to make sure that a company is preparing their financials in compliance with whatever standards they're using. So if, while there is a fraud risk assessment that's done in an audit, it is not specifically to try to find fraud. If it comes up, that's a great thing. There are some frauds that are actually discovered by auditors, but it's not that often. Frauds are most often found by tips. when somebody decides, they see something and they say something. And so it's really important to have a setup where you have a way for people to report things that they say and encourage a culture of reporting something that's wrong in your company, because that's the way most frauds are found. Not just stumbling over them, but somebody sees something and decides that it's rising to the level of they must report it, and they don't agree with what's happening. But in terms of forensic accounting, I'm just going to give the definition because everybody hears forensic accounting. They hear the word forensic, they think like CSI and all those, crime shows on TV and, autopsies and things like that as well. So the word forensic, and maybe this is just a geeky me that wants to make sure that everybody understands what forensic means, is that you're doing something that can be used in a court of law to adjudicate a dispute, or relating to or dealing with the application of scientific knowledge to legal problems. So when you're doing forensic accounting, while we don't have a lot of standards in forensic accounting like you do in audit, in terms of you have to do certain things certain ways, because forensic accounting is very different. There's a lot of things we do, and it's a very wide-ranging field, but you are supposed to investigate things in a manner such that you can scientifically prove things. So you want to do analyses of data or evidence. You want to be able to document everything that you've seen along the way. You want to use procedures that have been tested and are generally accepted by other professionals in the field, so that you can take your evidence, say, to a judge, to a jury, and prove what you have found. That's really, that's a really important part of forensic accounting, is having the evidence, having the proof, doing something that somebody else can re-perform and come up with a same or similar conclusion that you came up with. And it's a valid process that you've followed to come to your conclusions. So you do have to do things in the right way. You have to be educated in the appropriate ways to do things, and the appropriate ways that will be acceptable in a court if something is going that far.
Excuse me. So both of you, Megan less than, excuse me, and Becky, both of you started on the audit side to some extent, right?
Well, I did.
I thought you spent some time, Megan. What would you say is the difference between an auditor and a forensic accountant? Don't say smarter.
Megan, what do you think?
So I would kind of go off of what Becky was saying, not necessarily on like an individual level, but there's no set process for us to follow. So every project that we work on is different. So that is definitely a way that I would distinguish between forensic accounting and auditing. Auditing, you have your audit binder and you follow certain tests that you do every single year on your clients. But each project that we get, I find myself doing something new, and you kind of have to start from scratch and look at the data that you're given and figure out how to analyze it in a proper way.
Okay.
So you have to have a lot of creativity in terms of figuring out what is the best way, what are the methodologies that you need to do to get to the end goal of your particular case.
It's funny you say that, because when I graduated college, oddly, I have a BA in accounting, and it's William Patterson.
Not BS, huh?
No, not BS.
You're not full of BS, no.
Yeah, you know me, right? And William Patterson since changed it to a BS, but I'm a BA, and I tell people accounting or auditing, I always say, is an art. You have to figure out how to get things done with what's given to you, and I would bet even more, because now you, Becky and Megan, you almost have to put yourself in the mind of the person that perpetrated. Thank you. The act, and think, what would they do to try and find the result, to get your results. But that's not going
Yeah.
to be on a checklist somewhere.
That's right.
No.
And every person who's perpetrating some sort of fraud and it's not always even fraud. It's just doing something maybe that normal people wouldn't do. Everybody has a different motivation for doing that. And sometimes it's just really hard to understand where that person is coming from and why they did something like that. And, especially when it comes to, they've spent so much time and energy either perpetrating a fraud or, finding ways around the rules that, and for what benefit? Was it really worth it, to do these things and destroy somebody's trust in you for whatever reward or benefit you got out of that? When, maybe you could use that creativity and that energy and time to work for good instead of against everything else. So it's you really see the worst in people a lot of times, and as much as you see, people still just keep on coming up with new ways to do things.
So, I mean, I heard the first time I really heard it was Anthony Blasi say it, and I believe, Megan, I've heard you say it too. And Becky, you just mentioned the word, but can you describe or mention what the fraud triangle is, Megan, for the attendees?
So we've got opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. Becky, did I get that?
You got it.
Perfect. I still got it. So you
It
take a
wasn't passed.
triangle.
She passed. Okay, she passed
Yes,
that.
thank you.
Great.
Okay, great.
That should have been a polling
question.
question.
I'm still a certified fraud examiner. Good. So you have a triangle, and those are the points of the triangle: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. And when you combine all of those things, you set yourself up for a situation where someone has the potential to commit a fraud. And a lot of Becky kind of just touched on this, but a lot of the cases that we work on, when you have some kind of asset misappropriation performed by an employee, it's a long-time employee of a company. It's not someone that's just kind of showed up and then started stealing from this business. It's frequently a long-time employee that's trusted by the employer, and a lot of times it's in small businesses because they don't have the resources to have extensive internal controls. But somebody finds themselves in this situation, whether it's they have they're living beyond their means. That's a pretty frequent one. If somebody's living beyond their means, then there's an opportunity to commit fraud. Opportunity in the sense that they have the ability to do it, and then rationalization. A lot of people can convince themselves that what they're doing is not wrong. Whether it's I work all these hours, I work beyond what's expected of me, and I don't get paid enough for it. So what I'm doing isn't bad because I've earned it, quote unquote.
And would you use opportunity, motivation? The one you used originally, I thought of recently, and that's pressure. And while somebody may not be, I'm going to use the word thief. And if I use the word thief during this discussion, I'm not, with the eye shades or the hooded mask that's going in and stick them up type of thing. So you know what I'm referring to. Not everybody's a thief. And the one that I thought was very interesting was pressure, because some leaders of organizations put pressure on somebody to get something done, and the only resort they have to satisfy that leader is to do something that might be illegal. And that's something I thought about. It came into my mind, I don't know, over this past year when some things were going on, maybe in November, some stuff was happening. And I heard certain things, and I said, wow, I could see people doing things that they shouldn't do because they want to make the people happy. And it's the pressure, which might not be directly labeled in the triangle, but I imagine
It is.
Yeah. That's one of the points.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what the issue is, so just keep in mind, though, that the fraud triangle is really meant to describe when somebody who wouldn't ordinarily commit fraud does so, commits occupational fraud, which is a fraud that is committed against your employer, based on the abilities that you have due to your employment with somebody. And it's not, it's not meant to describe or predict for, somebody who is psychotic and is just, has other rationalizations for committing fraud, but it's mostly for occupational fraud, which is generally broken out into asset misappropriation, corruption, or financial statement fraud. Now, a lot of what you'll find with financial statement fraud is that pressure from, say, management or investors that you have to meet certain thresholds or, covenants for a loan. And so business might not be going on as smoothly as you would hope, especially like in a COVID situation, or, just something may have happened, in the economy or within your company that, you're not meeting your targets. And that's when people start cooking the books and committing financial statement fraud. And so according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, they do a report to the nations every 2 years. They survey all of the certified fraud examiners out there and ask them to talk about the cases that they have been involved in investigating in the past 2 years. And according to this survey, and this has been essentially the same over the 11 or so years, or 11 editions, which is about more than 20 years that they've been doing this, is that asset misappropriation is the most common type of occupational fraud, but it has the lowest level of losses. So maybe the average loss that people will suffer from an asset misappropriation is about $100,000. Corruption is in the middle, so a lot of schemes that have corruption involved. And being in New Jersey, I think we're pretty familiar with what corruption is includes, and that's essentially influence peddling, things like that. So that has kind of the median level of occurrence, as well as a slightly higher level of losses. About 200,000 is the median loss for a corruption case. But financial statement fraud happens the least, but it has the highest exposure in terms of losses. So the median loss on a financial statement fraud is about $950,000. And financial statement fraud is just a much wider ranging fraud. And typically it's more higher level people who are involved in that, because those are the people who can influence or have the reason to influence a financial statement. And you just look at the big, like the Enrons and other, hi, my cat likes to be involved here too.
Obviously she likes fraud.
She just wants to be the center of attention. But so, the financial statement fraud is typically something that is wider ranging. I mean, you have, possibly you're committing that fraud to either convince investors to give you money or convince a bank to continue lending to you. So there is more money on the line when that is the type of fraud, but it doesn't happen quite as frequently as something like asset misappropriation, because you have more employees at lower levels who are who have access to cash, who have access to inventory, et cetera, who might be able to take that and convert it for their own purposes. So, those are just kind of the general things that people have to be concerned about in business with people committing an occupational fraud.
So and that was my next question to you, was the common fraud. So that's off the list.
But actually, I mean, a lot of the things that that we deal with aren't just fraud, though. It's disputes, business disputes, which really, that's kind of, while we do love to talk about fraud because it's kind of fun and exciting and interesting. It's also the business disputes that have a really big effect on a business and the people who are involved. And those are the things that people can do theoretically, very simple things to try to prevent, which is kind of what we really wanted to talk about today. Just in terms of what businesses, what people should be doing to try to never have the need to hire us. Because forensic accounting can be really expensive. It's so everybody remembers the quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." I don't know, was that a Ben Franklin one? I'm not sure. Brad, I would think you would know that.
No, no, I'm not good on the proverbs like that.
Okay.
I would say it's more biblical.
I have no idea, but I'm sure everybody has heard that. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Essentially, you're better off spending a little money now to prevent something that is going to cause you great financial pain in the future if you don't take care of it now. So mitigating fraud or some sort of business dispute is a lot more expensive and time consuming and full of grief than trying to prevent it in the first place.
Well, it's like anything else. It's almost insurance.
Exactly.
And try and get people to spend up front. And Alan will say it all the time. It's not a problem until it's a problem. Nobody
Right.
wants to pay for insurance until after the problem happens. Then they want to backdate the policy.
Right.
And I mean, you mentioned, but you started mentioning something about the people. Are there certain personality traits that you should watch for in any type of fraud? I mean, I know that the misappropriation of assets, common or living beyond means or unsavory habits. Are there things that you can do to start watching for things? Not that that's going to be your safeguard of how to prevent issues.
Right. Megan, you want to take that?
So, the most common, and Becky mentioned it before, the ACFE report to the nations, the most common red flag is what I talked about before in people living beyond their means. But then below that, there's financial difficulties. These are all red flags to look for in someone that could potentially commit a fraud. There's financial difficulties. They're unusually close with a vendor or a customer. Control issues, like they're unwilling to take a vacation or unwilling to let certain duties go. We've seen that a lot in projects where after the fact, once a problem comes to light, the employee, they never took a vacation and they were never required to either. And they wanted to do everything. So sometimes that can come across as a great employee. They take on all this responsibility. They do all this work. But really, there's other nefarious things going on. Or if you have an employee that has some kind of outside of the workplace issues, that could also be a red flag. But things you can do to mitigate these issues are definitely having strong internal controls. Like segregation of duties is huge. I think every single fraud case that we work on, there was an issue with segregation of duties. There's one person that was doing too many things that allowed them to get away with whatever asset misappropriation. That's usually what it is. They were perpetrating. So that's a big one. I'm working on a project right now that I would say it's a dispute, and it's a dispute because the two sides just were not seeing eye to eye on what the managing member of this business was allowed to, I guess, spend money on. I'm trying not to give too many details, but there's no employment agreement. So it's difficult on my end now to prove what the issues are, because his response to all of the money that he was spending was, well, this was part of my guaranteed pay. But there's literally no agreement that says anything otherwise. So having it.
Yeah, so he wasn't lying that he was spending it. He was spending it under, and he might be right or wrong, but convinced himself that he was spending it or utilizing the funds as his compensation. And,
yeah, exactly.
And so I'm going to launch the next poll. In your work, have you experienced or observed one of the following situations? Shareholder dispute, employee theft, vendor fraud, or breach of contract, which goes into the area of what you were just mentioning, Megan, is the difference, not the difference of a different aspect of fraud. Somebody could say that what he was doing was perpetrating fraud, but he thought that he was acting in the proper way.
I don't necessarily think that he thought that, but now that he did all of these things, it's difficult to say, well, you shouldn't have been doing this because there's no documentation that I can, put into a report that says, he was supposed to take X amount of money as his guaranteed pay, but he instead took Y. I don't have that, so that makes my job more difficult.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'll ask you later on what your craziest or weirdest engagement was. I've done forensic work. Typical as a younger person sitting around the office, we meet somebody, here you go, and you look through these checks, stuff like that. But I was a partner at another firm, and they just needed somebody to go out to the Hamptons to do forensic work. And I had a day
Volunteer.
available. I said, I'll go. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I'll go check out the Hamptons now. It was the Hamptons in November. Okay. And I had to look for one piece of paper. That was it. One piece of paper. And they put me in a basement in November. And I had to search through boxes for 8 hours, and there was mold, and I'm allergic to mold. So I had to sit there with my t-shirt over my face for 8 hours looking for that one piece of paper.
Did you
By the
find
way,
it?
I didn't find it. And I looked. I did not find it. So so it wasn't as much fraud as there was a dispute on a particular item. And and Becky, you made sure to emphasize that, yes, fraud is the sexy thing that people want to hear about. And a lot of the younger people want to go into forensics. By the way, Monica corrected me. It's forensics and valuation. Okay.
Yes.
People want to go into forensics because they think that they'll find fraud within an hour, including commercials. But to your point, there are a lot of different aspects that you're looking into, and a lot of it's shareholder disputes, as you had put up there. Now, the one that I found interesting that was on your polling question, and I saw in some of your notes, was vendor fraud.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
So vendor fraud can take a number of different looks. So you might have a vendor who is, who comes in, who gives you a quote on something, and, you go ahead and go into business with them, and then, suddenly you're getting change orders, or, there's for some reason, either the quality of the product that you're getting is not what you expected, or you're being charged more. That's one type of vendor fraud. Another type of vendor fraud is, an employee creates a false vendor, and starts that maybe has a name that is very similar to a legitimate vendor that you actually do have in your purchasing system. And so, starts routing payments for nothing, or for fake invoices to that vendor, and is then benefiting from that fraud in that way. And, that's one thing where, you need to have a decent vetting process to make sure that vendors are legitimate before you approve them and add them to your system.
Yeah, I've worked on a number of projects where, at least two I can think of off the top of my head, where someone in the company created a vendor that had, like an acronym that represented this vendor that they used frequently, and nobody thought anything of it because it seems to be the appropriate vendor. But the one I'm thinking of right now, she was just paying herself and taking that money and going on a lot of vacations, and that was what kind of tipped off the business owner, was that we know how much we pay this employee, and they're going on these elaborate vacations all the time. So how is this happening? And so fortunately for them, they kind of were aware of their employees' life outside of the job, and that helped them kind of uncover that one.
Right. But on the other side, I had, I was doing a job for a small professional services firm who actually ended up almost going out of business because they had an office manager slash bookkeeper who was committing fraud in many ways. And one of them was vendor fraud. She had set up a vendor with a name that looked like it was a legitimate vendor. And there was one of the partners of this firm was the primary signing. He would be the primary signer for checks when they had to pay invoices. And so he was familiar with vendor names. But what she would do was wait until that partner was out of the office and then ask one of the other partners who wasn't as familiar with the vendors and the process to sign the checks. And that's when she would put through the checks that were to the fake vendors. So, that again is something that you really need to be aware of. And it's really hard with smaller businesses. And we see it a lot with professional services businesses, whether it's medical offices, law firms, even possibly accounting firms at times, where everybody really, you have a mission, and nonprofits too, especially. You have a mission, you have a program that you want to accomplish, and that is really what's on your mind. That's what you want to do. Nobody ever told you had to deal with the administrative side of everything and make sure that your employees are all doing the right things. So it can be very difficult to have to focus on those types of issues and take the time away from what else generates money for you, and make sure that you've got controls and that people understand the expectations of their jobs, and that you don't let oversight get too lax. There has to be oversight over people.
Yeah, and I want to talk about internal controls more while we're on the area of different types of forensic services or forensic reviews. We talked about some shareholder disputes, some vendor fraud, which seems to be tied with employees a lot. Raymond asks, how about disputes as it relates to divorces? Do you get involved with that?
So we do. And those disputes can be some of the worst because there is so much emotion wrapped up in a divorce, and so much antagonism and a lot of things that make it very difficult to resolve these disputes and really understand what's going on. But these disputes can range anywhere from one spouse has total control over all the finances, and the other spouse maybe isn't working or just never cared about what was going on. And so doesn't have the knowledge, but thinks that there's more money or there's, hidden assets someplace. So you have a dispute over essentially just the basics of the finances. And that's one thing, we really highly recommend is that if you were in a marriage or a domestic partnership or any type of relationship like that, where there's an imbalance of financial knowledge, whether it's something that you both agree on, that you're essentially just separating responsibilities, and this person takes care of one thing and that person takes care of the other thing. When it comes to finances, you really both have to have at least a baseline of knowledge about what's going on and an understanding of what are the bills you have, what are the assets you have, where is the money going, do you have joint accounts, do you have separate accounts? It's really important for everybody to have that base knowledge so that when, ultimately, if it comes to a divorce, that there isn't so much of a dispute in terms of what is there and what is not. Because that's really where a lot of it comes from. Another type of dispute and divorce that comes up a lot is family-owned businesses. So say one spouse is involved in a family business that it might be a multi-generational business, has been passed down from family member to family member, and they get married, and does that spouse coming into the family get granted shares in that business? I prefer that they wouldn't, but that's always a possibility that happens, whether they're involved in the business or not. But even if the spouse is or is not involved, when it comes down to a divorce, that business that one of the spouses is involved in is going to be the target of evaluation or some sort of forensic work to determine what the value is, what piece of that the other spouse is going to get some value for in the divorce.
The similar to the sibling, how about just and I guess it might be shareholder, but siblings owning the business together, not spousal, but brother, sister, brother, brother, whatever, however siblings work. I can go through all the combinations. I'm sure you figured it out. I imagine there could be disputes in that situation too. And this all must be very emotional, especially divorce. And I'm sure there's a lot of justification in every action in the divorce situations and the sibling situations. Well, they got more. They were favored as the kid, so I want my share now, type of thing.
Right. That, and also, sometimes, a family-owned business, you expect it to provide a living for a number of family members, but not all of the family members are equally involved or contribute equally to the running of the business, the success of the business. So there is inherently an imbalance of power and an imbalance of, entitlement, I guess you might say, of, who thinks they should get something because, I'm working harder than that guy. They're freeloading, they're just hanging out and, using the money for, personal items, etc. So in family-owned businesses, there is frequently less formality in terms of agreements, in terms of establishing expectations of people's responsibilities. And, while you might have other businesses that aren't involving families, people are compensated and, based on their contributions, based on the job responsibilities they have. And if they aren't fulfilling those responsibilities, well, maybe they are terminated because of that. In a family-owned business, that's a lot harder to do. There's too much, involvement with the emotions and with the family, ties, etc. And so a lot of times they don't have those formal agreements that lay all of those things out and the responsibilities. So you have a lot more conflict in those areas. And that can take a lot of time and money with attorneys and accountants unraveling those things. So it really, one of the basic things that we would always recommend to people in business of any kind is to make sure that you have a really solid operating agreement or shareholder agreement or whatever it is the agreement is that the owners and top management are involved with, so that you lay these things out. You want to be looking at, succession and how are you going to value an interest if somebody passes away or if somebody wants to withdraw from the company or if there is a dispute like this, that somebody's taking money and we need to buy them out now, or they're doing something wrong and we need to buy them out. You need to have a good solid agreement. Too many companies have boilerplate agreements that are just very vague and don't give enough detail about how they're going to handle disputes in the future. And so, people don't want to spend the money at the beginning to develop one of these things. They don't want to spend the money 10 years into the business to update it so that it reflects the current atmosphere of the business and the current environment. But it's really important to get a good business attorney who understands your industry, who understands your business, who has worked, if it's a family-owned business, understands those dynamics so that you can be prepared for how you're going to resolve future disputes. It's going to help you and save you a lot of money if you do that. So highly, highly recommend that you have a good attorney and who can help you. And you really have to make sure that your attorney is qualified. You can't just get anybody off the street to do these things.
But we had somebody who asked a family friend, and we had 3 people who asked nobody. So I'm going to put up a quick poll. And I see a trend in what you and Megan, what you said before, too. And real quick, I'm going to let this poll go up. I'll finish my statement. According to the Association of Fraud Examiners 2020 report report to the nations. That sounds really cool. Okay. I'm telling you, as an auditor, we don't have a report to the nations. Barry Milan, son from the ACPA, you got to get on a report to the nations for auditors. Okay.
This used to be just a U.S. focused report, but they expanded it to the entire
Okay.
world. Yeah, so
Barry, I want a report to the galaxies. There we go. I want to be cooler. Anyway, approximately what % of revenue do organizations lose fraud to each year? So, you know the answer. Who wants to give the answer?
it's
Nobody?
5%.
Okay,
Five.
good. It's 5%.
It's estimated that, yeah, so the CFEs who are polled in this particular report every 2 years, they estimate, and this percentage has been the same for a number of years. They estimate that organizations lose approximately 5% of their revenues to fraud of various natures every year. So that's hey, if you had 5% more in your revenue, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? So I think that's something that people should consider. I mean, how much is that 5% if you look at your revenues and your organization? And how much is it going to cost to implement better internal controls, to hire really qualified people to do the things that they need to do with your organization? One of the things that is really important is to have a good bookkeeper, or depending on the level of your organization and what you need, it's either the bookkeeper, the controller, the CFO, an outside CPA, whoever it is. You need to have somebody who really knows what they're doing to keep your books. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of those reasons is that if you come to a point in the future where you have a dispute, there's a lawsuit, there's a business interruption claim that you need to make, there's a damages claim that you need to make, there's a divorce where you need to value a business interest. If you don't have thorough, comprehensive records, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. It's going to take a lot longer, which means it's going to be a lot more expensive. And if you don't have a good bookkeeper and a good record keeping and accounting system, how are you running your business to the best degree that you can? If you're not able to understand the numbers and the results that your business is producing, you can't manage your business properly. You can't grow it properly. You can't plan strategically without that knowledge. So that's one of the most important things that any business, whether it's a nonprofit, for-profit, family-owned business, multinational corporation, you need to have good people and good systems managing your financial and accounting areas.
So we did a roundtable back, I think it was in February, on business acquisition, merger and activity. And one of the things I caught in that session was, you got to start early. You got to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And now listening to what you're saying, I hear a trend in what, the theme should be is think ahead. Don't wait till, the adage of you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I find weird because how did they get it in the tube originally? I find that weird. But anyway.
They had a special, really expensive machine.
Yeah, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So think about it beforehand. And Megan, you mentioned something earlier, internal controls. And I think that, the joke is, there's no segregation of duty, so we can't have anything. There is always something that you can have as a level of controls. And
yeah. And I think that, something that Becky kind of touched on before, which is, she's talking about the operating agreements and how people don't want to pay for that up front, and they don't want to put the money out for these types of things, or people don't want to take the time and they just to have like a solid bookkeeper. I think an issue that we see all the time is that people just run their businesses based off of trust. Like I'm in business with my brother. We trust each other. We don't need an operating agreement. I've been working with this person for 25 years. I can, they can write the checks and sign them. I trust them. I've known them forever. And you can't rely on trust as an internal control because people are flawed. And it's just not a good way to run a business, whether it's a major corporation or a small business. There's always ways that you can come up with something to create some type of controls to prevent fraud in your business.
So that's interesting. So you put another thought and phrase in my head. Don't rely on trust, and hope is not a strategy. Two ways for a business to fail: rely on trust, and hope is a strategy.
And it's understandable. Businesses, especially when they're startups, or when they're just running very lean and don't have a lot of extra cash and time to deal with these things, it's hard to do it. But it really is very important because if you want your business to continue growing, you need to think about that, because a fraud or some sort of dishonesty could happen, and it would destroy everything for you. And you don't really want to deal with that. It's best to think about it and figure out your strategies for dealing with these things ahead of time. And you can never say never. As Megan was talking about, trust with people. And this happens a lot with nonprofits as well. I mean, everybody's focused on the mission, and everybody thinks, oh, nonprofits are wonderful. They're all good. Nobody working in a nonprofit would do anything bad. But unfortunately, never say never. You don't know what somebody's life and pressures are that they may, normally not consider doing something wrong, but for these pressures that they cannot share with anybody else, or don't feel that they can, and they have an opportunity. It's the fraud triangle that we're talking. They have an opportunity to, ease their pressures by stealing money or, getting somebody a no-show job or whatever. And they, you just don't know what people will or will not do.
Right.
There are certain pressures that can make a person act entirely differently from what they normally would and what you would expect, and you just will never know.
So I want to make sure people are getting the tips out of this. Get your agreements in line.
Yeah.
Get your controls in order, or establish controls. I don't care how small you are. Even the smallest, and because we have a lot of people on here that are nonprofits, and they always ask questions. I'm surprised I haven't seen more from them. Even the smallest of nonprofits can have some, and the smallest of businesses can have an element of internal controls. Yes, if it's an individual that's running the business and doing everything, then he's pretty much just stealing from himself or herself.
And one thing that's important to know is that sometimes even just the perception that somebody is watching is enough to deter somebody from committing fraud.
If they're really watching.
Well, no,
right?
But even the perception. So we spent 7.5 years monitoring construction at One World Trade Center for the Port Authority. And it was always the thought, well, we had, a couple of guys who would be on site. Everybody knew who they were. And everybody knew that there was just a much higher level of observation going on and scrutiny going on this site. And they never knew. I mean, it's like putting up a camera in an office. That camera may or may not be hooked up to anything. But if the people who are working in that office don't know that, and they think somebody is watching them, they are much less likely to do something wrong than if there was nothing at all. So even if it's kind of an intermittent type of control, like, intermittently the owner looks at the bank statements or looks at canceled checks or reviews invoices that are being paid. As long as that's done on sometime on an unpredictable basis, that is a control that will deter fraud. If nothing is done whatsoever and people know that nobody's watching them, well, they can do anything they want.
Yeah, right, and that's what I meant. The perception is when they find out that you're not really doing it, that the camera's unplugged.
That's an issue.
Well, don't let that happen. But even having a tone at the top of, making people aware that fraud is not acceptable in your business and that you operate a certain way. That's one of the top controls that they talk about in the ACFE report to the nations. Make sure that your employees know how you feel about these things, and just keeping people aware of it in the back of their mind, that is a prevention tool.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, I think the other thing I was going to say is the "We Are the World" slogan. Check the ego at the door.
Mhm.
So when we come in and we're hired to do stuff as an auditor, we have to audit where we think fraud could happen. We're not looking for fraud, but we have to audit towards focus our audit procedures. And it's amazing the pushback you'll get, and people are like, I would never do that. Why are you even considering that? And it's like, if you didn't have the ego, you would want me to be doing this.
Yeah.
One of the things in our professional guidance is professional skepticism. Ron Matan, okay? And he would always say, remember that. If you're pushing back so hard, what are you doing?
Right.
What don't you want me to look at? Is there a problem there? So, you know what? Check the ego at the door, let us in, and let us do our job.
Right.
Now, you guys have it harder because you're usually brought in after the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and you're right, absolutely right, is that, when you are implementing internal controls and codes of conduct and ethical practices, nobody is immune from that. Not from the owner, the chief executive officer, right down to the lowest clerk. Everybody has to be subject to those controls, because if one person at the top can get away with doing whatever they want, well, everybody else is going to kind of take on that attitude as well. You can see it in any company. If the tone at the top is, do as I say, not as I do, it's going to be a mess. So you really do
resentment too.
Exactly.
Yep.
So everybody, from the top guy all the way down, you all have to be, you can't just give a person a pass because they are, the top person in the office. It's got to be everybody.
So I have two more questions, two more areas for you. COVID, has this created a situation?
What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've necessarily seen the impacts of it yet, because
Really?
it's still, it's still ongoing. But I think that, especially businesses that have probably pared down their employees during COVID, they had to let people go. That is a situation that could expose people to fraud. There's definitely issues now with business interruption and COVID, and having the appropriate language in your insurance policies as far as that goes. But yeah, I don't think we are yet to see the full effect of COVID on whether that is going to increase or decrease fraud. But there was a study that went out that the ACFE did, where they polled members, CFEs, and asked whether they thought that COVID would increase, decrease, or have no effect on different areas. And basically all of the responses were that COVID was going to have an increase in fraud. And I think it gave certain timelines. And I think that we're still not at the point yet where we're seeing that.
Right, especially when a lot of people were working out of the office. So, your normal internal controls that you would have used when people were on site are totally out the window. So if a company didn't reassess their internal controls after everybody, after there was a change in work style, then they're missing things. And it's very possible that they won't discover those things until people are back in an office setting, or, they've updated internal controls and taken a look at what's going on.
Well, we have a checklist in our audit file that we created when we asked the clients. All the clients have, has anything happened with people switching to working from home? And it's okay, Becky, because everybody said no problem.
Yeah.
It's so
Absolutely
I don't know. And Megan, as soon as you said that, it didn't dawn on me. Oh yeah, when the tide goes out, we're going to see what damage has been created. So I have another poll I have to do. And then Ken asked an interesting question I wanted to just read off. The quick poll before the time's up. I think I'm reading it as which is the sexiest accountant, but it's which following job is most interesting. I like it the other way, but anyway. Well, B better come up on my question. So this is not fair. Megan, stop answering. I'm watching you. But Ken did ask a question. He said he finds it amazing that companies don't use positive pay, which I've seen some frauds still get through on positive pay, but I'm sure it has prevented a lot more frauds. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It helps with situations. And if you don't know what positive pay is, talk to your banker. They should be using it. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about us as the auditor. What role should the auditor play in convincing clients to use available fraud prevention tools?
Well, I think that, I believe in an audit, you guys are supposed to be interviewing employees of the company and talking about fraud and asking directly about fraud. But I think that also one of the things that that auditors can do to convince clients is demonstrate to them what they might be losing. What is the bottom line impact of potential fraud if they didn't implement certain controls?
Okay. And I know that we use particular tools that we can make available to our clients. It's not part of a management system because we're the auditor. But one of the things that I've recommended is internal control reviews, because we're not responsible to test controls as part of our audit process. Some nonprofits, yes. Some other companies, yes. But most private companies, we don't have to test internal controls. We have to understand them, not test them. I recommend some companies do some sort of agreed upon procedures relating around internal controls, especially smaller nonprofits, because some of them think they need an audit. I said, why don't you have a compilation done and have agreed upon procedures done on areas that you think are important? Mm-hmm. Similarly, that's where because I'm not trying to beat up the clients on fees. That's not what I'm looking for. That's why I mentioned a compilation and an AUP. It's cheaper actually than an audit. Is there something that you guys do called Forensic Light or anything like that? Natty Light, Keystone? I'm doing that for all the young people, okay?
Right. So since we don't have, specific standards in the forensic accounting field in terms of how we do certain engagements, we can design things to meet a client's specific needs. And I feel like there's a little bit of an echo. I don't know if you hear that or not.
You're good.
Okay. So we can design, a process or a forensic review. I don't like to use the word audit because that's, to me, that's a financial statement audit, there is no such thing really as a forensic audit. But we can we can design procedures to meet a particular need. We can, do a little bit of a look-see, review certain records, do some background check type of work to get a feel for whether there might be something going on or not. And then, go deeper as needed if that's discovered. But it all depends. It depends on what it is. I mean, if it's a litigation type of situation where you need an expert report, we have to abide by what is going to be acceptable in court. And there might be, like a damage calculation. We have to go through all of the, we got to go through everything in order to create a report that's going to be accepted and going to really bolster your case. But in other types of situations where it might not be a litigation situation, it might be prevention, it might be detection, there are different levels of what we could do.
And thank you for saying that. And so if it's not litigation and they want some review of something, they should be contacting you. If it's potential that there's going to be litigation, they can contact you and you can help them contact an attorney, but it's going to go through the attorney-client privilege situation.
Right.
Yeah. And so if it's litigation, Don't be the person that's handling it yourself, unless you're a lawyer. And don't ask your cousin. That's not a lawyer either. Okay?
Right. Yeah. If it's litigation, you definitely want an attorney involved. And if you are engaging a forensic accountant in a litigation matter, we'll typically want to use a Covell agreement, which means that we would be engaged by the attorney on the client's behalf, and so that the communications are subject to attorney-client privilege, attorney-client work product privilege. So or attorney work
It's your
product.
cousin if it's my cousin Vinny. It is now 9:30. Becky, Colleen and I told you we would get to 9:30, okay? And I'm sure there's more that people would want to hear because this is a hot area.
We could talk about this all day.
Yeah. So I will ask, and what I usually do before I thank everybody will leave, I ask you just for a quick closing comment. If you had like one thing that you wanted to really impart on people, who wants to go first?
I'll go and say that, I know people are conscious of fees and they don't necessarily want to pay for something that they're not going to see any results in. But when this question of what should the auditor, what role should they play in encouraging clients to use fraud prevention tools? I think hiring us or someone like us and having us do an internal control review, something along those lines, it's never going to be bad for your business. Even if we come in and say your internal controls are great, at least you know. And I think prevention is so important, and it's not done nearly enough. So that's kind of my parting words.
Thank you.
And I will reiterate that trust is not an internal control.
That's a great way to close.
Don't keep trust out of it. Trust should not play a part in internal controls.
Oh, I'd have a tough relationship with you. Come on, what do you mean you don't trust me? It's my Bergen County attitude, Victoria. All right.
Let's not get into that debate.
So I want to thank everybody for listening in. This is a great topic. I've listened to frauds and forensic seminars, not just fraud, because you corrected me on that, other business disputes and stuff. And there's so many different areas that this can go down and where issues can happen. So I really want to thank you for at least bringing it to the surface a little bit, and what people should possibly look out for and what they should possibly do. So I want to thank you, Rebecca and Megan, for joining us today. And I want to thank everybody else for listening in. And if you have any desires, please look at our website to look at the other presentations that we've put together, including Sobel Insights, which is some short sessions on some various topics. I know that Megan's going to be doing a session with us soon. So thank you, everybody, and